There is a strange reason in time still feels uncomfortable. Not because people have glowing clocks on their arms. Not because everyone stops aging at 25. Not even because the movie imagines a future where a person can die because their account hits zero. The strange part is that the movie takes a sentence we already live with, time is money, and it stops treating that sentence like a metaphor. That is what makes it hard to shake. Because the clock in this movie is supposed to feel futuristic, but the fear behind it is not futuristic at all. It is the fear of being late on rent. The fear of missing one shift. The fear of waiting too long in the wrong line. The fear of needing care, needing transportation, needing help, and realizing the price of being alive keeps moving faster than you can run. In Time is not always a subtle movie. Honestly, it almost refuses to be subtle. Its metaphor is right there on the skin. Life becomes a balance. Every coffee, every bus ride, every mistake, every delay takes time directly from the body. The poor do not just lose money. They lose minutes. The rich do not just buy comfort. They buy distance from panic. And maybe that is why the idea stayed with people, even when the movie itself divided them. You can argue about the plot. You can argue about the action scenes, the romance, the dialogue, the politics, all of it. But the central image is still brutally easy to understand. A person looks at their arm and knows exactly how much life they can afford. That image turns private anxiety into something visible. It takes the kind of stress people usually hide behind normal words, bills, credit, overtime, savings, debt, and turns it into a countdown everyone can see. And for an American audience, that is not just a clever science fiction trick. It is uncomfortably close to the language of daily life. We already talk as if time is something to spend, save, waste, lose, buy, borrow, and run out of. We already measure life in hourly wages, paid time off, commute time, billable hours, deadlines, late fees, waiting rooms, and the small penalties that hit hardest when you have the least buffer. So maybe this movie was never really asking, what if time became money? Maybe it was asking something harsher. What if money has already been deciding how much time people get to breathe? That is the version of In Time I want to sit with here. Not as a recap, and not as an ending explanation. More like a thought that starts simple and becomes harder to ignore the longer you hold it. Because the movie's warning is not only that the poor die young. It is that the poor are made to spend their whole lives protecting the little time they have, while the wealthy can move slowly enough to pretend that calm is a personality trait. And once you notice that, the clock stops looking like a gadget. It starts looking like a confession. One of the easiest things to miss in Time is that poverty has a speed. Before the movie explains every rule, before we understand the time zones, before the whole system is laid out, the bodies already tell us what kind of world this is. In Dayton, people move like delay is dangerous. They run. They check their arms. They bargain quickly. They walk with the alertness of people who cannot afford to miscalculate. Even a small pause feels expensive. A few extra minutes are not just inconvenient. They are food, transport, rent, safety, maybe one more chance to reach someone before the clock runs out. But when the movie enters New Greenwich, the rhythm changes. The rich do not move like hunted people. They stroll. They pause. They speak with less urgency. Their rooms have space around them. Their gestures are slower. Their risk is curated, almost decorative. Even when danger enters, they often seem offended by it, as if fear is not supposed to touch their district. That contrast may be one of the film's strongest ideas. The poor run. The rich walk. And that is not just visual style. That is the entire class system expressed through movement. The movie understands something simple. When you are close to zero, time does not feel like time. It feels like pressure on the body. It affects posture. It affects attention. It affects the voice. It affects how quickly you decide, how much you can think ahead, and how much dignity you are allowed to keep while solving a problem. In real life, this is not always visible as a glowing clock, but the pattern is familiar. Some people can wait. Some people can reschedule. Some people can take a day off, absorb a fee, call a rideshare, pay for delivery, go to a better doctor, move closer to work, or simply recover from being tired. Other people pay for every delay twice. Once with money, and again with their body. That is why the movie's world feels so direct. It does not just say poor people have less. It says poor people have less room between a problem and a consequence. When Will lives in Dayton, he lives inside that narrow space. His choices are not made from peace. They are made under a clock that turns every second into a little threat. This does not make every choice pure. It does not mean desperation automatically creates wisdom. But it changes the room where judgment happens. That is important, because a lot of moral judgment assumes people had time. Time to think. Time to calm down. Time to compare options. Time to recover from panic. Time to choose the elegant answer instead of the immediate one. In time keeps asking whether that kind of moral patience is actually available to everyone. And maybe the answer is no. Maybe patience itself is a class privilege. That is why the movie's body language matters. The wealthy in New Greenwich do not only have more years stored away. They have enough safety to make slowness look natural. They have enough distance from emergency that their calm can be mistaken for character. They look composed partly because the world is not constantly charging them for hesitation. So when the movie shows poor people running, it is not simply trying to raise the tension. It is showing what economic pressure does when it gets into the nervous system. It turns life into motion. It makes the body spend energy just to stay alive. And once you see class speed, the whole film becomes easier to read. The countdown is on the arm, but the real clock is everywhere, in the streets, in the gates, in the transportation, in the prices, in the way people stand, breathe, look, and move. The warning is not only that some people have less time. It is that they are forced to burn more of themselves protecting it. The most painful scene in Time is not a battle. It is not a big speech about the system. It is not a bank robbery, a chase, or a dramatic confrontation with the people at the top. It is someone being just a little too late. Rachel Salas is not killed by a monster in the usual movie sense. There is no villain standing in front of her, explaining the cruelty. There is no single face we can blame completely. She is killed by price, distance, delay, and the refusal of the world to give her even a small margin for error. That is what makes the scene hurt. It feels administrative. The cost changes. The time is not enough. The trip becomes impossible. And because this world treats time like a neutral exchange, the death can almost look like nobody did it. The system does not have to hate her. It does not have to notice her. It only has to keep functioning. That may be the film's clearest warning. Sometimes cruelty does not arrive as rage. Sometimes it arrives as a rule that everyone has learned to treat as normal. For a youth audience, that emotional shape is not hard to understand. The movie makes it extreme, but the feeling underneath is familiar. One bill, one fare, one delay, one missed payment, one unexpected medical cost, one problem with transportation, one schedule change, one emergency that does not fit inside the money available. People may not literally die because a green clock hits 0 on their arm. But many people understand the fear of not having enough buffer. Not enough savings. Not enough paid time. Not enough flexibility. Not enough help before the consequence arrives. That is why Rachel's death does more than motivate Will. It explains the emotional logic of the world. Until that moment, the premise can still feel like an idea. Clever, harsh, stylized. But after that moment, it becomes personal. The system is no longer just unfair in theory. It has taken someone specific, someone loved, someone who's trying to get home. And this is where the movie becomes more complicated than a simple rich versus poor story. Because Will's grief is understandable. More than understandable. The movie wants us to feel how impossible it would be to stay calm after something like that. He is not reacting to an abstract political argument. He is reacting to a world that made his mother's life depend on a few unreachable minutes. But this is also where the warning begins to change shape. Grief can reveal injustice, but grief can also become a dangerous kind of certainty. When pain is that fresh, every boundary can start to look like part of the crime. Every person with extra time can start to feel guilty. Every rule can start to look like violence. And maybe some of those instincts are right. Maybe the system really is violent. Maybe the rules really are built to preserve death at the bottom. But even then, the film is asking us to watch what pressure does to a person. It does not only produce sadness. It produces permission. Permission to take. Permission to fight. Permission to decide that because something was stolen from you, you now understand the whole moral structure of the world. That is why Rachel's death cannot just be treated as a plot point. It is the emotional wound that turns the movie's idea into action. It is also the moment that makes Will easy to follow, easy to defend, and maybe too easy to excuse. The scene says, this is what the system costs. But it also asks, what happens to a person after the cost becomes personal? Because once the countdown takes someone you love, the question is no longer whether the system is cruel. The question is what kind of person you become while trying to answer it. The time zones in time are not just locations. They are prices. That detail matters, because the movie does not imagine a world where the poor are locked behind one giant wall, with a sign that says they are not allowed to leave. It imagines something colder and, in some ways, more believable. People can move upward. Technically, the road exists. The gates open. The wealthy district is not imaginary. The system can say, with a clean conscience, that nobody is completely trapped. But every step toward that better life costs more time. Every border becomes harder to cross. Every gate asks the same question in a different form. How much of your life can you spend just trying to reach a place where life is cheaper to survive? That is how the movie turns class mobility into geography. The zones make inequality feel physical. Dayton is not only poorer than New Greenwich. It is separated from it by a chain of costs that punish the attempt to leave. The system does not have to forbid movement if it can price movement high enough. That is one reason the movie still connects to a US audience. A lot of real inequality does not announce itself as a locked door. It appears through rent, school districts, commute distance, healthcare networks, neighborhood safety, transportation, time off, credit, deposits, fees, and the quiet fact that opportunity often becomes more expensive the closer you get to it. People are told they can move forward, but the path itself has tolls. In time makes those tolls literal. This is also why the film's metaphor is stronger than a simple message about greedy rich people. Greed matters in the story, but the system's deeper power is that it teaches everyone to accept the price of crossing as normal. The cruelty is not only that the rich have more, it is that the structure makes the poor spend what little they have just to approach the border. And when Will crosses those zones, the movie gives us a fantasy of upward movement. He enters the spaces that were not built for him. He violates the calm. He brings Dayton's urgency into rooms where people have trained themselves not to feel urgency at all. That is satisfying to watch. But it is also part of the warning. Because individual crossing does not automatically change the price of the gates. One person can break through. One person can expose the absurdity. One person can carry the anger of a whole district into the world that benefits from it. But the system is designed to survive individual exceptions. It can point at the rare person who crosses and pretend the border was fair the whole time. That is why a Ku Klux angle here cannot just be, Will escapes poverty. The more interesting question is what the priced border reveals about the story we tell ourselves. If a person technically can leave, do we stop asking why leaving costs so much? If a person technically can survive, do we stop asking why survival keeps getting more expensive? If a person fails to cross, do we blame their choices before we examine the tolls? The movie zones make that question visible. They show a world where class is not only about how much you have, it is about how expensive it becomes to get near anything better. And that is where the film's warning becomes sharp. The system does not need to say, stay where you belong. Sometimes it only needs to ask for payment at every step until people learn to turn back on their own. The strange thing about New Greenwich is that it does not look free. It looks careful. That is one of the quiet complications in time. The movie clearly wants us to feel the cruelty of a world where the rich can hoard centuries while the poor fight for minutes. But it also shows something else. Having endless time does not automatically make people alive. In New Greenwich, time is abundant, but the people move as if life itself has become a security protocol. They avoid risk. They manage exposure. They preserve themselves. Even games of chance feel controlled, because losing does not mean the same thing when you have so much stored away. Death is distant, but fear is not gone. In some ways, fear has become more refined. That makes Sylvia interesting. She is not poor. She does not understand Dayton from the inside. She has been protected by the very world the movie is criticizing. But that protection has a cost of its own. Her life has safety, but it also has a kind of emotional stillness. She has time, but not necessarily meaning. She has years, but not necessarily freedom. This does not make her suffering equal to Dayton's suffering. It is important not to flatten that. The poor in the film are living near death. The wealthy are living inside fear of loss. Those are not the same wound. But the movie uses both to make one larger point. A society built around hoarding time does not make anyone fully human. It makes the poor desperate and the rich cautious. It makes the poor run and the rich freeze. It gives one side no room to breathe and gives the other so much room that life becomes a museum piece. Felipe Weiss understands this world with cold clarity. To him, the imbalance is not a bug. It is the logic. If everyone had enough time, he suggests, the structure would collapse. Scarcity has to exist somewhere so abundance can feel meaningful somewhere else. That may be the coldest argument in the movie. Not because it sounds wild, but because it sounds practical. And that is how many harmful systems defend themselves. They do not say we enjoy suffering. They say, This is how order works. This is how incentives work. This is how value works. This is how stability works. Someone must be under pressure for the whole machine to keep moving. The film asks us to look at that logic and feel how empty it is. Because if your peace requires another person's panic, then maybe it is not peace. Maybe it is distance. That is why the rich in this movie do not always look happy. They look insulated. They look preserved. They look like people who have escaped urgency but replaced it with control. They can buy calm, but they cannot escape the knowledge that the calm depends on a world where someone else is always seconds short. And this is where In Time becomes more than a simple fantasy of taking from the rich. It asks whether a life built on endless self-preservation can still feel like life at all. For an American audience, that question lands in a specific way because success is so often sold as freedom. More money, more control, more safety, more distance from emergency. And of course, those things matter. They matter deeply. The film is not pretending poverty is somehow spiritually better. It is not romanticizing struggle. But it is asking whether safety becomes something else when it depends on permanent scarcity below it. Maybe the rich in New Greenwich are not trapped the way Dayton is trapped. But they are still living inside the clock. They just have enough time to pretend they are not. In this world, the law does not stop the countdown. It protects the countdown. That is why the timekeepers are more interesting than they first appear. It would be easy if they were just villains chasing the hero because the story needs pressure. But the uncomfortable part is that they often sound reasonable. They talk like people maintaining balance. They treat movement of time as a problem of order. They are not confused about the rules. They are committed to them. Raymond Leon becomes important because he gives the system a human face without turning it into a cartoon. He knows more than he says. He understands the poor zones. He understands what it means to live near zero. And still, he enforces the logic that keeps people there. That makes him different from Philip Weiss, but not innocent. His conflict is not ignorance. It is identification. He has made the rulebook part of himself. And once a person does that, a moral question can start to feel like a procedural threat. If too much time moves downward, the system becomes unstable. If the poor suddenly have room to breathe, the exchange rate changes. If the rich cannot count on permanent distance, order itself feels endangered. That is the story the system tells. And the timekeepers protect that story. This is where In Time moves from personal tragedy into institutional morality. Rachel's death shows what the system costs. The borders show how the system sorts people. New Greenwich shows who benefits from it. But the timekeepers show how the system survives. It survives by making enforcement look neutral. Nobody has to say, poor people should die. They can say, time must circulate properly. They can say theft is illegal. They can say the balance must be preserved. They can say if people get more than they are supposed to have, the whole structure breaks. And of course, theft and chaos are real moral problems. The movie is not strongest when it pretends all rebellion is automatically clean. Will's actions can be understood without being perfectly pure. Redistribution through danger is still danger. A righteous motive can still carry consequences. But the film is asking us to compare moral dangers honestly. What is more dangerous? The person stealing time because people are dying, or the system that makes dying at zero look like accounting? That question is difficult because it pushes against the comfort of legality. We often want legal order and moral order to be the same thing. It is easier that way. If something is allowed, maybe it is acceptable. If something is forbidden, Maybe it is wrong. In Time refuses to leave that assumption untouched. The film shows a world where the most violent thing might also be the most normal thing. A person runs out of time, and the system treats it as the natural end of a transaction. Someone has centuries, someone has minutes, and the difference is protected as if it were balance. This is why the timekeepers matter. They are not protecting life. They are protecting the price of life. And that is the warning hidden inside their professionalism. The most frightening systems do not always need cruel faces. Sometimes they need clean uniforms, procedural language, and people who believe their job is to keep the machine from feeling guilty. By the time the movie reaches this point, the question has grown beyond will. It is no longer only, can one man break the system? It is, how many people have to treat the system as normal before its cruelty becomes invisible? Maybe In Time was never subtle. But maybe the thing it was pointing at was never subtle either. That is what I keep coming back to with this movie. Its world is exaggerated, direct, sometimes almost too clean as a metaphor. The poor have minutes. The rich have centuries. Life becomes currency. The body becomes a balance sheet. A person dies when the numbers run out. It is not hiding the idea. But the more I think about it, the bluntness might be part of why the warning still works. Because real life already hides this idea behind softer words. We say spending time, saving time, wasting time, buying time, losing time, working overtime, waiting time, paid time off, time theft, deadline, grace period, late fee, opportunity cost, billable hours. We are surrounded by language that treats time like a market object. In Time simply removes the politeness from that language. It makes the metaphor glow on the skin. And once it does that, a lot of ordinary things start to look different. A delay is not just a delay. A commute is not just a commute. A fee is not just a fee. A medical bill is not just paperwork. A missed shift is not just a schedule problem. A person with savings does not simply have more money. They have more future, more recovery, more room to make a mistake without becoming a tragedy. That may be the film's most useful thought. Money buys time away from fear. Not perfectly. Not always. Not in every emotional sense. But in the practical sense that shapes daily life, money can buy the ability to wait, to rest, to choose, to recover, to say no, to leave, to heal, to move, to try again. And when people do not have that buffer, they are not only poorer, they are rushed, they are narrowed, they are forced to live closer to consequence. That is why the movie's ending, whatever we think of its logic, is not the most interesting part. The real question is not whether Will and Sylvia can rob enough time banks to fix everything. The real question is why the world needed people to rob time banks before survival became negotiable. The film's answer may be simple, but the question is still useful. What kind of world asks the poor to run for minutes while the rich gamble with years? What kind of world calls that balance? What kind of world turns calm into a luxury and then judges panic as a personal failure? Maybe that is why In Time keeps coming back in people's minds. Not because it predicted one exact future. Not because it solved the problem it imagined. But because it made a feeling visible. The feeling that life is always being priced. The feeling that some people get to live slowly while others are punished for every delay. The feeling that the clock is not only on the arm, It is in the rent, the shift, the bill, the appointment, the commute, the waiting room, the missed chance, the thing you wanted to do, but could not afford the time to become. So maybe this was never really about time. Maybe time was just the one thing the movie could make visible enough for us to stop ignoring. And maybe the reason the warning still feels uncomfortable is because, deep down, we already knew the clock was real. We just did not expect a movie to say it this plainly.